Welcome to the 14th Hayley-Roxanna Crafts quick crochet video, where I share information, hints and tips on one area of crochet in a short video. In this video, I will be focusing on crochet accessories. Yarn and crochet hooks are obviously necessities to crocheting, and I've talked about these in more detail in previous videos. But there are other accessories that are useful and even essential to crocheting, which I will talk about in this video. At some point when crocheting, you are going to need to cut the yarn, and up to a point any pair of scissors could be used for this. However, I would advise you to have scissors specifically for using with fabric crafts that are not used to cut paper or anything else. This is so that they remain sharp and cut the yarn cleanly. These are the embroidery scissors I use mostly when I am crocheting, but any of these scissors are ones that I use with my fabric crafts, so would also be useful. You could also use a pair of snips like these, particularly if you don't want to be carrying scissors around. I have also heard of people who use the blade on dental floss, so that little bit there that usually cuts your dental floss, to cut yarn, especially if they are travelling on planes, just so that they don't have to risk that their scissors might get taken off them when they're going through security. Something else which is inevitable when crocheting is the need to weave in yarn ends. While some of this can be done by crocheting over your ends as you go, it is best to use a tapestry or yarn needle to ensure that they are woven in securely. Tapestry and yarn needles come in a variety of materials and sizes, and which you use comes down to the thickness of the yarn you are using and your personal preference. I prefer these plastic yarn needles if I'm working with thick yarns, as they have a larger eye for threading your yarn through. But if I'm working with thinner yarn, then I prefer these metal tapestry needles. These come in different sizes, but one like this I will use when I'm working with DK yarn. And I prefer these just as they fit under the stitches a little bit easier when the yarn's thinner and the stitches are smaller. While stitch markers are not essential, they are certainly very handy when crocheting. They can be used to mark the beginning and ends of rows or rounds, to mark pattern changes or repeats, or different sections of a garment. They are also useful if you are working on long rows to help with your stitch count. For example, if you had a row with, say, 200 stitches in, you could place a marker every 20 or 50 stitches just to help with your counting. So if something goes wrong, you haven't got as many stitches to count to find out where you might have lost or gained a stitch. Stitch markers come in a whole variety of different styles. You can get ones like these that just slip into your work. You can get ones like these that you pop into your work and clip shut. And you can even get fancy looking ones. I've got ones with numbers on, which I sometimes use, and these I just made myself, but you can buy similar ones to this. Sometimes they'll have different styles of clips on them, but those are just as good. And also, if you don't want to be spending money on stitch markers, you could just as easily use safety pins to mark your stitches, or even place in scraps of yarn. Just use your hook to pull them through the stitches that you want to mark. If you are using scraps of yarn, I would advise you to use a colour that's very different to the one that you're working in, just to make it easy to spot the marker. But it's an equally good way of doing it. My preferred stitch markers are these ones. that pop shut. They're easy to take in and out, but they're also quite handy if you're joining crochet pieces together, for holding the pieces together whilst you're joining them. If what you are crocheting needs to be a specific size, then some way of measuring it is going to be needed. You could use a ruler, but what you want to measure may be larger than the rulers that you've got. And also, once rulers are sort of longer than 30 centimetres, they can be a bit difficult to carry around. So this is where a measuring tape can be useful. Measuring tapes come in a variety of styles and lengths, but they sort of fold or roll up, making them easy to just drop in with your work. You can also get retractable ones, similar to like the metal ones that are used in DIY, but made with the fabric tape. But any type of measuring instrument is suitable as long as it's long enough to measure your work. Something I like to use in my crocheting is a felting needle, like this one. Felting needles have small barbs on the end that when stabbed through wool catch on the scales of the fibre and push them together. I use them to prevent my woven ends from coming undone. If you stab over the end of the yarn, it becomes matted with your work to prevent it from undoing. You do need to be careful that you don't stab your work too much, as this can cause it to become hard. But if done the right amount of times, I find it does help to hold the yarn end securely. You can get a block to stab into and a handle to put the needle in. But personally, I don't bother with those when I'm using my needles on my crochet. However, you do need to be careful not to stab yourself with the needle as you're stabbing your yarn. When you have completed a crochet project or even part of a project, you might want to block it. Blocking is essentially a way of using water to shape your crochet fabric to achieve a more finished look. In simple terms, you dampen your work and then pin it out in the shape you want and leave it to dry. You can get blocking boards like this, which are great for blocking smallish squares of crochet. They come with these pins which you pop into the holes to create the size that you want your crochet to be. Then you just dampen your crochet and place it over the pins and leave it to dry. However, these can be quite expensive, as well as limiting you to the size of the project that you can block on them. An alternative is to get interlocking blocking mats, which again can be expensive if you buy ones that are specifically for your crocheting or even knitting projects. But what I have bought are just these sort, which I will pop a photo in as well so you can see them more clearly, which are just children's play mats. These you can then lock together to whatever size you want. And then once you have wet your project, you can pin it out using T-pins like these, and then leave it to dry. Not only does using these blocking boards allow more flexibility with size, it also allows you to block different shapes too. That's all the crochet accessories I use to enhance my crocheting. Some crocheters may think some of these are unnecessary, and others may use other accessories. But what you choose to use is down to your personal preference. If you have any questions about crochet accessories, please pop them in the comments. In next week's video, I will demonstrate stacked stitches.